The summer after college, I went camping with two close friends, Jamie and Lex. None of us were exactly seasoned outdoorsmen. We weren't trying to go off-grid or test our survival skills or anything like that. We just wanted to unplug for a weekend, breathe some air that didn't come out of a vent, and maybe drink a little too much without worrying about alarms or inboxes. We picked this busy little campground near Lake Siltcoos, tucked up in Oregon's Cascade Range. It wasn't remote, more of a half-step into the wild kind of place. There were fire pits, gravel paths, and water spigots. Even the outhouses didn't smell too terrible. The kind of spot where you're more likely to run into someone with a Subaru full of trail mix than a bear. We got there late Friday afternoon, just as the shadows were starting to stretch across the pine needles. Jamie had borrowed a beat-up 4-person tent from his sister, some old REI model that smelled faintly of mildew and citronella. We popped it up quick, staked out the corners, and cracked open a couple warm beers from the cooler. The forest was alive with the sound of cicadas and the occasional breeze pushing through the trees like a slow exhale. The smell, pine sap, smoke from someone else's fire already going, was the kind of thing you forget you miss until it hits you. The plan was simple: grill some food, shoot the shit, maybe go swimming in the lake the next day if it didn't look too gross. Mostly, we just wanted to escape the monotony of our lives for a bit. Our site had a decent little buffer of trees, but not total privacy. Just across the clearing, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, there was another camp already set up. It wasn't like the others. No neatly packed gear, no minivan, no folding chairs. The guy's setup was a mess of faded tarps, scavenged crates, a bent-looking camping stove, and a canvas tent that had definitely seen better days. You could tell right away. This wasn't a weekend escape for him. This guy was living out here. We saw him shuffling around a bit, keeping to himself. He was wearing these heavy canvas pants, a flannel shirt despite the heat, and boots that looked permanently caked in old mud. He had a folding knife on his belt that he wore like a part of his body, not like an accessory, but like a limb. No hat, no sunglasses, just a thick beard, sunken eyes, and the look of someone who'd long since stopped caring how people saw him. He came over that evening, uninvited, but not exactly unwelcome. We had a fire going, and were halfway through cooking bratwursts over the grate. The sun had dipped below the tree line. "Name's Elias," he said. His voice was low and gravelly, like a dry engine that hadn't turned over in a while. "Been staying out here off and on for a couple of months." He didn't offer more, and we didn't ask. Jamie handed him a beer, and he settled cross-legged just outside the fire ring. I remember noticing how he stayed at the edge of the light, not quite joining us, but not hidden either. He told us stories. At first, they were normal enough. Talked about wildlife, said he'd seen a black bear rummaging through trash cans down near the boat launch, warned us about wild boars rooting through people's food at night. Then he mentioned a cougar that had crept up on his tent one morning. Said he woke up because he could feel it breathing near the canvas wall. That got us to shut up and listen. We knew there were cougars in the Cascades. It wasn't totally implausible, but something about the way he told the story. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a memory he was replaying to himself out loud. Then, things got, weird. "I've seen other things, too," he said, as his voice got even quieter. "Up in the sky, not planes. These ships, triangular, silent. They don't move like anything we built. They hover, they watch." He paused and made a triangle shape with his hands. "Dorito-shaped," he added, smirking. "Orange lights at the corners. They come out just after midnight. Not every night, just sometimes. You can hear 'em if you listen hard enough. They hum real high, like a mosquito in your skull. Lex gave a half laugh, the kind that's trying to say, "That's crazy," without sounding rude. I could tell he was unsettled, though. He'd stopped eating. Jamie just sipped his beer and looked at the fire. Elias didn't seem to care whether we believed him. He kept glancing up through the trees like he was expecting one of those triangle ships to show up at any second. After a while, he stood up, brushed dirt from his pants, and without another word, walked back into the trees towards his camp. We sat there for a minute, watching the place he'd vanished into. "That guy is definitely living out here," Jamie finally said, "and definitely on something." "Yeah," Lex muttered. "That triangle shit. What was that about?" None of us said the other part, that there was something about Elias that felt wrong. Not overtly threatening, just a bit off. Like a guitar string that won't stay tuned. We stayed up late anyway, maybe to prove to ourselves that we weren't rattled. Passed around a bottle of whiskey, told ghost stories that now felt a little too real, laughed too loud at dumb stuff. There were other campers still awake, a few voices drifting from down the loop, some distant music. It helped cut the unease. When we finally crashed, it was close to 2 a.m., the fire low and the tent smelling like smoke, sweat, and half-eaten chips. The next morning, I woke up with a dry mouth and a full bladder. The tent was already warm, sunlight filtering through the nylon in soft gold streaks. The woods outside were alive with birdsong, and everything smelled like sap and ash. I unzipped the tent, stepping out barefoot, and froze. About 20 feet away, tied to one of the tall pines just off the path, was a rope. A thick, sun-bleached rope, frayed at the edges with a loop at the end. A noose. I backed up so fast I almost tripped over the cooler. My stomach did this slow, horrible roll, like I was about to throw up even though I hadn't eaten yet. "Lex," I croaked. "Dude, get out here now." He stumbled out, bleary-eyed. Jamie followed a second later, still half asleep. When they saw it, they both just stopped. No one said anything for a long minute. What the hell?" Jamie said, his voice low. Lex walked over, cautiously, and looked at it without touching it. "It's not new," he said. "This rope's been used, but I swear to God, this wasn't here last night." I nodded. "No way we missed that." "Do you think?" I started, but couldn't finish the thought. "Elias," Jamie said. "It has to be him." We ran over to his site, half expecting him to be sitting there with that same dry smile. But it was empty. His tent was gone, so were the tarps, the crates, the fire ring. Nothing but flattened grass and a few strands of twine near a root. He'd vanished, clean. It was like he'd never been there. We didn't talk much after that. Just started packing up like there was a fire on our heels. No breakfast, no lake, no joking around. We were in the car and driving back to Portland within the hour, our eyes fixed out the windows, each of us pretending not to think about the way that rope had swung gently in the breeze. 5 years passed. We never went camping together again. Lex moved to the coast. Jamie got married and had a kid. I floated around Portland doing odd jobs, working at bars, painting houses. Life kind of moved on. The memory of that trip stayed folded away like a photo that you don't look at but can't throw out. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Lex's brother. Lex had gone missing. His car was found parked at a trailhead near Mount Hood. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. 2 days later, they found him. He'd hung himself from a tree in the woods. The grief came in fast and sharp, but underneath it, there was something else. Something colder. I called Jamie. We hadn't spoken in over a year. He answered on the first ring. "Do you think it's connected?" he asked, already knowing what I was thinking. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think we'll ever know." And we won't. I don't believe Elias hunted Lex down or played some long game. That's not it. What I do wonder, what I can't shake, is if something in Lex got broken that weekend, if some shadow stuck to him, if the image of that rope in the morning light found a corner in his mind and waited there, patient and quiet, until one hot summer day, he followed it. We'd been camping at Deep Pine Lake for a couple of days already when the couple showed up. Our site was one of the better ones, tucked up a slight ridge, shaded by tall pines, with a decent view of the lake and enough room for 3 tents, a fire pit, and our beer cooler. Just Aaron, Mike, and myself. 3 days of fishing, drinking, and arguing about who forgot the camp stove. It was Mike, for the record. The site next to ours had been empty since we arrived. Late in the afternoon, on day 3, a dusty old Jeep rattled up and parked awkwardly near the clearing. The doors opened, and out stepped 2 people, maybe mid-30s, very tan, very wiry, like circus folk who traded in clown shoes for Carhartts. They didn't say much at first, just nodded and started unloading. No tent, just a large canvas tarp and some weathered duffel bags. One of them, ponytail guy, pulled out a thick, coiled lasso. The woman, who had a noticeable limp and bandana around her neck, like she was auditioning for Tombstone, carried a crate that clanked when she dropped it. We weren't trying to stare, but we did that thing where you pretend to talk while side-eyeing the situation, like you're watching a slow-motion car crash. Then it got acrobatic, for lack of a better description. They spent the next 2 hours doing what I can only describe as competitive lasso trick practice and casual hatchet juggling. Ponytail guy was whipping the rope around himself, lassoing rocks, spinning it in wide loops over his head, sometimes catching small tree branches in midair. The woman, she was tossing him 2 small hatchets, like camping-sized tomahawks, up into the air, flipping them, catching them, sometimes behind her back. Every time she caught one, she let out this tiny whoop that echoed across the lake like a bird calling for a duel. It was mesmerizing and frankly kind of badass. Also, incredibly dangerous. "Is this some kind of weird couples therapy?" Mike whispered. "No," Aaron said, cracking a beer. "This is performance art, and I'm here for it." Then it went south. One moment the woman was juggling, and the next, a loud yelp cut the air. We all stood at once. She dropped to her knees, clutching her hand. One of the hatchets had landed wrong, or maybe her timing slipped, and the blade had sliced deep into the meat between her thumb and palm. Blood was already dripping to the ground. Ponytail guy ran to her, dropping the rope and grabbing a towel from their bag. They wrapped her hand quickly, speaking low and fast. We didn't approach. It didn't feel like the moment. A couple of minutes later, the guy jogged over to our site. "Hey," he said, panting. "She cut herself. It's bad. I'm taking her to the hospital in town. Could you guys watch our stuff?" he asked. We blinked. "Yeah," I said. "Of course. Appreciate it. We'll be back tonight. Shouldn't be too long." Then he turned, helped her into the Jeep, and drove off, tires kicking up a cloud of dust, disappearing around the bend. At first, it was kind of surreal. We stood there, watching the blood on the pine needles dry in the sun. Mike finally broke the silence. "So, hatchet juggling." Aaron nodded. "They made it look easy, but also, emergency room." We waited around a while, had some dinner, a couple of beers, shot the breeze. Then Mike looked over at their camp, at the lasso curled on a stump. "I mean, are we not going to try it?" he asked. "Try what?" I questioned. He grinned. "Roping stuff." So yes, full conversation. We got drunk and tried to teach ourselves lasso tricks. It went exactly how you think. Aaron got the rope caught in a tree on his first throw. Mike managed to rope a lawn chair, then tripped and fell face first into the fire pit. No flames, thankfully, just dirt. I spent 20 minutes trying to lasso a beer can and ended up pulling it toward me like a lazy cowboy fishing for a cold one. Then Mike took it a step further and tried to juggle 3 pine cones, shouting, "It's basically hatchets, but safer." It was not safer. He threw one into Aaron's face. By midnight, we were bruised, covered in dirt, and laughing so hard our ribs hurt. Still no sign of the couple. We sobered up quick at around 1 a.m. when a random owl spooked us so bad. Mike dropped the lasso into the fire pit. Thankfully it wasn't lit at the time, but still, the mood shifted. "Weird they're not back," I said. "Yeah," Aaron chimed in. "Maybe she needed surgery." We agreed it wasn't our problem, but it kind of felt like it was now. By morning, their site still sat empty. The lasso was where we'd left it, the hatchets neatly arranged on a log, untouched. No car, no footprints, nothing but a little dried blood and the echo of sharp steel. We hiked to the ranger station a couple miles down the ridge. We told them the story, the couple, the lasso tricks, the injury, the emergency hospital run, the fact that they never came back. The ranger, an older guy, khaki shirt, sunglasses tan, listened patiently, wrote it all down. "You get a name?" "No," I admitted. I didn't think to ask. "Plate number?" Aaron frowned. We didn't look. The ranger sighed. "We'll check it out. Could be they left overnight, went home, forgot to grab their stuff. Happens more than you'd think." We left the next day. They still hadn't returned. Their gear sat in silence, the hatchets untouched. About a week later, I called the ranger station out of curiosity. A guy answered, but he pulled the report. "No follow-up," he said. "Gear's still there. We logged it as abandoned and locked it up in the shed. No one came back to claim it." He told me. "No missing persons report?" I asked. "None in this county. Why?" "No reason," I replied. I hung up and stared at my phone for a while, because for all the absurdity of it, the hatchet juggling, the rope tricks, the accidental bloodletting, the part that stuck with me the most was the guy's face when he asked us to watch their stuff. He didn't look worried. He looked like he was handing us something. There's a reason I usually go solo on my hunting trips. I like the quiet. I like waking up before dawn with the whole world still asleep. The smell of pine and coffee hanging in the air. The only sound being wind through trees or the click of my shotgun safety. It's peace, the kind you can't get near people. So a couple autumns back, I headed out for a solo quail hunting trip. A long weekend deep in national forest land. I'd been to this area before. 2 hours of dirt roads and no cell service. Perfect. I set up camp on a slight rise, overlooking a brushy valley that looked ideal for birds. No signs of anyone else, just me, the breeze, and the rustle of leaves. I was just getting my gear sorted when I noticed two guys walking up the hill toward me. At first I thought they were rangers, maybe locals, but no. These guys were in rough shape. Dirty doesn't even start to cover it. Their clothes were caked with mud, dried blood, and something that looked like motor oil. One wore a camo jacket with one sleeve ripped off. The other had no shirt at all, just a pair of suspenders hanging loose off his jeans. Both were barefoot. That detail still sticks with me. Barefoot, in late October, on sharp rocks and pine needles. They weren't just dirty, they were off, like they'd crawled out from under a truck and downed a bottle of vodka on the way here. The shirtless guy pointed at my gear, eyes locking on my shotgun case. "You got bullets for that gun?" he asked. I straightened, not in a threatening way, but enough to make it clear I was aware of the question. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Enough." He smiled. All teeth, no warmth. "Right on," he said, then wandered closer, peering at my cooler and gear like he was shopping. The other guy didn't say anything, but he stood to the side, kind of swaying, staring at me without blinking. That's when I noticed the guy had a massive burn down his right arm, from just below the shoulder to the wrist. His skin was blackened in places, red and blistered in others, with some parts peeling off like charred meat. It was barely wrapped in a dirty rag that looked like an old dish towel, stained deep brown from who knows what. I caught a whiff of something rotting when the wind shifted. It was coming from him. The way he stood there, quiet, eyes hollow, it creeped me out more than the burn. After a few minutes of awkward conversation, most of it them talking nonsense about how they were living wild, off-grid, and the government can't find us here, they turned and wandered back into the woods. No goodbye, no wave, just gone. I stood there for a while, shotgun now unzipped and resting beside me, heart beating like a war drum. That night, I didn't build a big fire. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Just warmed a can of beans over a jet boil and crawled into my sleeping bag early, keeping my shotgun right next to me. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard them. Laughter, drunken wild, not the good kind. It was coming a little ways down the ridge, maybe 150 yards away. Then, loud banging, metal clanging, and then pops, kinda like fireworks or firecrackers. Not gunfire exactly, but loud enough to make me flinch. I peeked over the edge of my ridge and saw their camp, half hidden in the trees. Huge fire. I mean bonfire practically. Sparks going 20 feet up, and there they were, dancing around it, shirtless, barefoot, howling like animals. And one of them, I think the burn guy, was throwing 22 rounds into the fire. I watched one spark spin and pop, zipping off sideways into the brush. Then they ran, literally ran circles around the fire, ducking and laughing like kids playing war. One tripped, fell, screamed, and then started laughing even harder. It was chaos, drunken, dumb chaos. I backed away quietly, not wanting any part of it. I sat up the rest of the night, shotgun loaded, ears turned to every crack of a branch. Eventually, it went quiet. At some point, probably around 4 a.m., I must have dozed off, but not deeply. The next morning, the woods were silent, too silent. I figured I'd pack up, head back toward the truck. My weekend had officially gone sideways, but I hadn't even zipped up my pack when I heard voices. Different ones this time. Clear, Authority voices. I followed the sound to the trail and saw a couple of sheriff's deputies hauling the two guys out of the trees in handcuffs. Both looked like they'd rolled down a hill. Mud-caked, bloodied, eyes bleary. One of the deputies, an older guy with a horseshoe mustache, saw me and waved me over. "You the one camped up the ridge?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah." He gave me a tired look. "You talked to these two?" He continued. "Briefly, last night, they walked into my camp. Seemed off." He shook his head and said, "You're lucky they didn't decide to make you a problem." Apparently, the guy with the burnt arm had attacked someone 2 towns over just a few days before. Came at the man with a roofing axe during a dispute behind a gas station. The victim managed to fight back, lit him up with a lighter and a can of bug spray. That's where the burn came from. They fled into the woods to hide out. These guys weren't campers. They were fugitives. "What were they planning out here?" I asked. The deputy shrugged. "Who knows? Sometimes these guys go off grid because they're scared. Other times, it's just where they feel most dangerous." He paused. "Count yourself lucky they were too drunk to try anything worse." They found the axe later that day, buried near a tree not far from their fire pit. It still had dried blood on the handle. The guys were loaded into a cruiser. As they passed, the burned man looked at me again. He didn't say a word, but he smiled, just a little. And for some reason, that was worse than anything else. I left within the hour, didn't look back. I didn't hunt. I drove until I hit a gas station with cell signal, then sat in the parking lot for a while, trying to process what had just happened. I still camp, still hunt solo sometimes, but I've never felt the same out there since. That whole weekend changed something, because you go into the woods to get away from people. But I never could have expected what happened that day. I've told this story a handful of times, but it never feels like it fully captures how messed up that weekend was. Maybe it's because it sounds like one of those typical creepy camping tales. Except this one really happened, and the place where it happened, it still gives me the chills. This all went down in late July 2018, a few months after Becca and I started dating. She's a photographer, always chasing the perfect light, and I work at a bike shop in downtown Portland. We both needed to get away from the city, away from all the noise and bullshit, so we booked a trip out to a Forest Service campground near a reservoir in the Oregon Coast Range. We wanted easy access to hiking and water without going full wilderness survival. We picked Site 39, the last one in the loop, tucked back into a stand of tall pine trees that shaded the whole area. Behind the site, the ground sloped sharply down to the reservoir's edge, where people fished and kayaked during the day. A little clearing separated us from the neighboring campsites, but not enough to feel isolated. What we didn't know until after the trip was that the campground had been closed for months the summer before because of a series of unsolved assaults, mostly on women, mostly at night, mostly when nobody else was around. The rangers never gave many details, just vague warnings to be careful, to call immediately if anything felt wrong. Some locals whispered that the attacks were brutal, that the perp or perps had never been caught. It was a quiet rumor, mostly ignored on tourist forums. We only learned about it when we told a ranger about what happened to us. Friday afternoon, Becca and I rolled in at around 3 p.m., unloaded the gear, and set up the tent, a cheap 4-person dome that barely fit both of us and all of our stuff. The sun was warm. The air smelled like damp earth and pine resin. Other campers were scattered around the loop. We saw a family nearby with 2 little kids, a group of college kids laughing over beers, and a guy 2 campsites down from us. That last one was the only person who caught my eye. He was maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with a rough beard and clothes that looked like they'd seen better decades. Heavy boots covered in dried mud. A sun-bleached baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look like someone who'd come here for a weekend escape, or like someone who'd been living there. He was mostly quiet, but one time as we cooked dinner, he came over and introduced himself as Mark. "I've been hanging around here for months," he said, with the kind of voice that makes you lean in to listen. "Not always at the campground, but nearby," he continued. He seemed to want to chat. Becca and I made polite conversation, but something about him set my nerves on edge. The first night we were there, it was quiet. We cooked burgers, drank a couple of beers, and went to bed at around 11. I remembered how pitch black it was outside the tent, and the forest was alive with cricket songs and the occasional hoot from an owl. At around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. There was a sharp chemical smell, gasoline mixed with something burned. I unzipped the tent window to get fresh air and noticed a cigarette butt, but still warm, lying on the ground right outside the entrance. Neither Becca nor I smoked, and there was no path near our site where a stranger could have accidentally wandered. I flicked the cigarette into the fire pit, zipped up the tent, and I laid awake for the rest of the night, trying not to panic. The next day, we tried to pretend everything was fine. We hiked, swam in the reservoir, and laughed over lunch. But that night, it happened again. At around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint crunching noise. Someone stepping carefully on pine needles. Becca stirred, but didn't wake fully. I grabbed my phone and quietly unzipped the tent. Peering outside, my eyes adjusted slowly. There was nothing at first, just shadows and trees. Then I saw it. On the picnic table, a plastic spoon, melted and warped, smeared with something dark, sticky, and unidentifiable. I don't know why I crouched and touched it, but it was cold and slimy. I took it inside and tossed it into our trash bag. When I told Becca, her face went pale. She said she'd heard whispering outside the tent during the night. Soft, indecipherable voices, but thought it was just me mumbling. That's when I called the ranger station and asked more about the campground's history. The woman on the phone sounded tight-lipped, but confirmed the campground had been shut down for months the previous summer due to a string of assaults, mostly on women attacked while camping alone or in small groups. None of these cases had been solved. The ranger warned me that some people living around the forest weren't stable. "There's a few drifters and squatters," she said carefully. "Be careful who you talk to." We kept an eye on Mark. He never came close to our site again after that first night. Sometimes we saw him sitting by his fire, staring silently into the flames. I couldn't shake the feeling he knew more than he was saying. Our last night was the worst. We decided to stay up in shifts with a flashlight, but around 3:09, I woke to the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, right outside the tent. I froze. The tent fabric suddenly bowed inward, like someone was pressing against it. I didn't want to move or make a sound. Then the breathing stopped, and I heard footsteps running, crashing through the brush downhill towards the reservoir. Becca woke and whispered, "What was that?" I shook my head. We sat in silence until dawn. When the sun rose, something was on the picnic table again, a neat spiral made of small rocks, topped with a folded strip of duct tape shaped like a triangle. Nothing like that had been there before. I packed everything up in under 20 minutes. We didn't eat breakfast, didn't swim, didn't even say goodbye. Driving out of that campground loop, I looked back once. The ranger who checked us out didn't look surprised when I mentioned the cigarette, the spoon, the rock spiral. Site 39, she said quietly. We've had problems there before, last summer especially. I don't know if Mark was the guy who left those things outside of our tent, or if that was related to the assaults, but it felt like we were being toyed with. Maybe whoever it was responsible for those horrible assaults. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages, following nothing but a map and compass. No GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience, and you camp and overcome hurdles together and whatever else. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like I would have done during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods and a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point, when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s or early 80s, very pale, liver spots dotting his face, and a gray/white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought, seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes, in those weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice, though, that puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, making a step towards him, asking him if he was all right. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backward into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk, then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the old man. After maybe a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning to us, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanning for perhaps 50 feet or more and slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold onto or anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the hell did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it's hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. My uncle and I looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge, and was going to try and make my way down, when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us to come down the slope, telling us he needed our help, that his friend was in trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that we would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him and everything else. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now, or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum would do. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin had gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter-mile or so to the car. All the while my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was possibly a mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police, so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we were met with 4 police officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies, like first aid, emergency blankets, and other stuff. We led them to the exact spot, and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. It's one of my weirdest experiences to date. This occurred around 1999 to 2000. My best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and amateur pot growers. We would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed for ample light and shade for plants to grow, and that would not allow them to be easily found. One particular day, we went to an annex of trails located near a New Jersey state park trail system. The trails weren't in the park, but I had hiked them before and knew they weren't that frequented. We had gone out that day with our seeds partially sprouted in moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and started hiking in. We covered a mile or so and then ventured off the trail and into the woods. We found a clearing, planted the seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons off to mark the way to the plant spot to check them in the future. My friend and I got back on the trail and started walking back to the car, when my friend noticed a man in the other direction, just staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald head, wearing normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we definitely kept looking back, as anyone would when someone is behind them in the woods. We saw that he was walking 60 plus or so feet behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so due to us having anxiety that we planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also seemed to pick up the pace as we weren't gaining any distance. At one point, we decided to just get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into a thicket of sticker bushes, which I remember vividly getting shredded on. We got deeper into the woods and heard cursing. When we turned around, this man was coming through where we had just entered. It was at that moment we actually became scared. Mind you, we're 2 young, strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you into the woods is really creepy. We kind of made a U maneuver to outflank him, and came out of the woods a bit further down trail. Once on the trail, we ran. As we were running, there was a fork in the trail, and my friend went right, and I left. I realized my mistake, as my buddy was going down the correct path, and I wasn't. So I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow my friend. As I was running towards the direction we came from to get to the fork, I could see the man running toward me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough in my eyes. Survival mode kicked in, and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend who was walking at that point. I screamed, "He's after us," and we both booked it all the way to the car. We got into the car, shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared at the trailhead. He stopped there and just stared at us as we drove away. I've always wondered what that was all about. Did he want to kill a couple of 19-year-olds? Was he also doing something illegal in those woods and wanted us gone? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about that day, 22 years ago. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to ad-free videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.